salesperson, a representative for Kelco, at least in the summertime on weekends. And the rest of the time I spend my time here on my own farm. And for several years I wanted to make an instructional video that goes with the Garland machine that Kelco sells. A lot of the products that Kelco sells I use here on the farm, and the Garland machine is about my favorite because that's what we can make the most money using out of all the different products. But it's very simple to set up, but if it isn't set up exactly the way it should be, you can get into some difficulties with it and not produce the kind of Garland that you really want. So let's start in by setting it up. Now I have this all set up already, but I want to show folks exactly how to do it. Now the catalog has a nice illustration of how the string goes through the various places on there, but it doesn't have this. I don't know why. Some of the complaints that we get are that the string knots up where it goes into various places. So what I do is run this through this little staple here and then bring it up through. One of the things that you can do if you're finding that it does knot up, sometimes it helps if you just turn the ball of string over and feed it out the other end. You can see this ball of string is in its last third, and there's virtually no knotting at all. Most of the knotting takes place when the ball has just begun to be used. So you bring the string up through here, through the handle, and don't leave much space between this item and the handle because you can get some knotting here. Up through here and then straight through to here. The wire comes off here and through this little hole and up through this hole here. Now, it's important when you put the spool of wire on to put it on so the wire comes off the bottom of the spool. If it comes off the top of the spool, it's going to bind somewhere along here before it gets through that hole. The second most important thing about putting this wire on, probably the most important thing, can you come in a little bit closer, Tim, and show this? The tension on the wire is governed by this wing nut. The harder you have to pull on this wire, the tighter it's going to wind the garland. But the most important part of this whole little setup is this little red washer. See, the red washer has a flat spot on the bottom and that bolt has been cut off, and that keeps that washer from turning. When the wire is pulled, everything else will turn. This spring will turn, these other washers will turn, and without this stop washer here, the wing nut will turn, and that will change your tension every single time you pull the wire. And trying to make garland that way is totally frustrating, and you'll soon give up. So, I don't think there's anything more to be done unless you can think of something, Tim, on setting it up. What I like to do is leave some extra string when I begin my garland. And then I tie this together in some amateur way. It doesn't make any difference what you do, with some kind of granny knot, just so that the string and the wire are attached to each other. Otherwise, it's going to turn in the wind and fall apart. Now we're using some balsam fir this morning because that's what I could get to the easiest, but it works equally well with any other greens, white pine or Scotch pine, and you can see how easy this goes. And you'll notice that if you're already a wreath maker, you'll notice some similarity, and that is that we're winding it around its waist, not around its hips or its knees or its ankles. but up here around its waist. That way we don't get too much flopping. We're making a one-sided garland, but if you wanted to make a two-sided garland, it's pretty easy because you just put on one piece over here on this side, and then the next piece over here on this side. And you'll wind up with a rounder sort of a garland. If you want a bigger garland, you use bigger pieces. Fairly obvious. And a thinner garland, smaller pieces, and space them a little more apart. Now the next important thing to remember, don't bring it all the way off. If you do that before you put on another one, you'll create little clumps which have the potential to untwist and lose the greens off the piece. You can see that the string is acting as a core, and the wire goes around the greens and the string. That piece there, I just squeeze them together. This piece here can be used, squeeze it together. This one I'm going to break, squeeze those two together. And you can see already, we're beginning to make a fairly nice piece of garland. If you want to point the camera down there, Tim. Now you'll notice that one of the things that we've done here is this little box. This makes it a whole lot easier than if you didn't have that and you had this going on all the time as you made the garland. This holds it up there where you need it to be. There's enough space in here for my hand to give the little pull that I need to give on each piece. Over here is just a couple of little blocks set at an angle, and usually I have a piece of old rain gutter or something that goes down to the floor. And because we hire someone to make the garland most of the time, and we need to keep track of how much they make and pay them piecework, I have it measured so that it's 10 feet right from here down the rain gutter to the floor, and they put a little piece of flagging tape here when the end of it hits the floor, and then when the flagging tape hits the floor, they put another piece of flagging tape, and each time they put a mark on the tally sheet so that we know, and they know how much they've made at the end of the day. That's, I think, pretty much it as far as making the garland is concerned. As I say, you can use any greens. You can make it double by going side to side. And I'd like just to share a few ideas for selling the garland. When we started here several years ago, we made some before we opened, so that we could show people various applications. We put some on the cedar fence, we put some on the mailbox post, we put some on the porch railing, and we put it around our windows and doors here in the shop area. And then somehow or other, we decided that everybody would buy it to put around their front door, and we made a bunch of 15-foot pieces, and hardly anybody bought it for their front door because we had already showed them a lot of other ways to use it. So we decided that it was really counterproductive to try to second guess how people were going to use it. So we constructed this little setup right here. And if you can come around to this, Tim. And what this is just a homemade thing. We have 8 or 9 of these you can move around, and this sits on there, and we hook the, just tie the string onto that, and as we make it, we turn it and put it on. And then after it's made, after we fill it up, and this size garland, we can put somewhere around 200 feet on one of these spools, maybe a little bit more. And then we set it aside and fill another one. And at our sales locations, we have another one of these stands with a short table in front of it, and we can just take the full spool and set it on the other stand and measure it off across the table and cut it. And cutting it brings me to the last thing that I wanted to emphasize. Because when you cut this, wherever you cut it, after you have an employee or yourself, make sure that you get right in here and get the wire and find the string, even if you have to throw a couple pieces of greens away, and tie it. So that it doesn't come apart for your customer. And not only on this end, but the bottom end of this next piece, you have to do the same thing, because the next customer will be buying this and possibly hanging it up someplace, and if it starts to twist in the wind and shed the greens, you'll get a call at night that you don't need after a busy day. So make sure that you find the string, find the wire, and put them, secure them together in some way. I think that if you follow just these few little tips and don't get discouraged, it won't be very long before you're making some nice garland. Incidentally, one of the other functions of this box here and the rain gutter is that it's a constant gauge for my employee to be making the garland the right size, the size I want. Because if the garland's coming off and slopping over the sides of the box or falling out of the metal gutter, that means it's too big. So it makes a nice gauge for you. Make sure that there's not too much being put on. And you can see this goes pretty fast. When I have the greens here in front of me, I can make around 90 feet per hour. And even here in rural Maine, we can sell it for 75 cents a foot. Possibly I could get a little more. That's been my price since around 1990. And I've never raised it. And on this little farm of ours, we were able to move about 6,000 feet of it last year. We do have a couple of retail lots where we sell it as well, so that was 6,000 feet for the total. But at 75 cents a foot, and for what little it costs to produce, it's a significant part of our total picture. My theory has always been that if I don't have everything that a person wants when they come to get their tree, if I don't have wreaths and garland and centerpieces and all the other greenery they might want, they might discover when they went down the road to get what they do want, they might discover that that farm has a better tree than we do, and I'd never see them again. So that's another reason to be making the garland, other than the money involved. And I think that just about does it, Tim.